Acts chapter 4. It's the closing of Peter's statement in this kind of tribunal court, or the last of his sermon to them, depends on how you want to look at it. And he talks about Jesus as the rejected cornerstone in verse 12. Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. I talked about that yesterday, and now we move on to the reaction of the priests, the Sadducees, and the other various Jewish leaders. When they saw the courage, this is verse 13, when they saw the courage of Peter and John, they realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men. They were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. A couple of quick things there. They saw the courage of Peter and John. Now, Peter was the spokesman, but John somehow exerted a kind of courageous confidence as well. They weren't cowering here. They weren't saying, maybe you could rethink this. They presented the truth, and they stood on the truth. There's an interesting thing about courage, and it's a little bit of a bunny trail, but I think it's probably, well, in my opinion, it's worth, going down. Courage is a much underrated character quality, in my opinion. And I'm going to have to be careful, because I could go on a pretty easy tirade against snowflakes. So I don't want it to be so much a tirade as just an observation. I think there are some snowflakes who believe they're courageous right up until they're confronted with another idea, and then they collapse. You're so mean. I've had this happen to me on social media, and more and more I'm getting very tired and fed up with the fact that when you talk in terms of facts, you're just mean. I've got lots of ideas on this regarding, so where did that come from? And who's responsible? Well, the bottom line is, you can have your own opinion on where that came from. I'll tell you who I believe is responsible. And that is every single one of us, because we either choose to be courageous or we choose to be offended. You see, when we deal with the truth, when we speak the truth, if it's an important conversation, there will never not be a possibility of causing offense. Jesus said that. In my quiet time reading this morning from the book of Matthew, he says, I came to create conflict. And that's my paraphrase, but essentially that's what he said. Fathers will betray their children, and children will betray their parents. And what in the world is that about? Well, I think it's about if the truth is what matters the most, then it's going to set up a dynamic where if I value the truth supremely and you don't so much, there's going to be a problem. Or if you believe that there is your truth and there is my truth, and your truth doesn't fit with my truth, which I'm way up to here with that concept, because if truth is truth, it's truth for all people in all times, in every situation. Now, the interpretation and the application of truth, that there is a sense in which that remains fluid, but the truth. Okay, so back to the idea of courage. our again, it's just me, and it's kind of an old guy rant. But you know what? Our culture doesn't really require courage. You think about Davy Crockett and his culture, the pioneer culture. Well, it absolutely required courage. Us, I might not get my parking space. They might be out of Coke Zero. I mean, you see, I'm not against modern conveniences. I love my conveniences. But I will have to say that soft, ubiquitous convenience tends to soften courage. Courage is not built with soft stuff. Courage, I heard Jordan Peterson in an interview, and he said, our children need to do dangerous things carefully. I think that's a fabulous concept, because by doing dangerous things carefully, a person grows courage. All right. So lots to that. And the last thing I'll say about courage is I don't want to be an alarmist, and I'm trying in my own life not to be overly pessimistic, but it seems to me a very strong possibility that in the future, Christians will need more courage than we have needed in the last 100 years in America, anyway. It is in the last couple of hundred years even, but especially the last 100 years, it's not been difficult to be a Christian. We've never experienced direct persecution because of our Christian commitments and convictions. It could be that in the coming decades, we will need courage that seemed unneeded and unnecessary in my lifetime, anyway. So if that's going to be the case, my thought is now would be a good time to start working on our courage muscles. Now would be a good time to help our kids grow courageous, our grandkids to grow courageous. You don't want to wait until you need it to start working on it. Now, for us as believers, how awesome is this that the God who created us has determined to set up residency in us. And one of the things that he will do as his Spirit sets up his home in us is to give us courage. So, but Peter and John obviously somehow exuded courage when they saw the courage of Peter and John. And then second, they realized they were unschooled, ordinary men. Oh boy, we live in a world that has so esteemed formal education that the unschooled, the ordinary men and women are of less value than the highly educated and obviously more intellectual. I'm not anti-education. Glad I got it. Glad I have 2 college degrees, and glad they're degrees that I can apply. But I do know this. I've met a large number of men and women who never made it through college. Some never made it to college, who are incredibly intelligent, and they didn't. How do I say this? They're not lacking. They're ordinary, but our world has grown. And I'm in this mood, so I should have said before, but I am a real mood as I can consider and contemplate American culture, we have made common sense uncommon. I really am not against higher education, but I've got to say, look around. There's a lot of higher education that is, it seems to very much depart from common sense. Now, there is such a thing as the counterintuitive. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about if this is A and this is B, then C will be the outcome. Okay. The bee in my bonnet doesn't have to be a pain in your neck, I suppose. So I'm going to move on. Ordinary men, unschooled, uneducated. In Peter's day and John's day, to be unschooled meant you had no formal rabbinical training. If you were unschooled and ordinary, it meant you were just from the working class. This is an observation about the priests, the Sadducees, and even the Pharisees. They looked down their nose at everybody because they were more well-educated, in their own opinion, than anyone in their culture. Boy, we have to be careful of that, don't we? You just think, I have to be careful of it. There are times when I catch myself thinking about people that I don't even know. I'm just making a judgment by what clothes they're wearing and what kind of car they're driving or not driving, and just totally superficial things, and I'm judging them. I'm looking down my nose at them. So they were astonished and took note that these men had been with Jesus. How would that be? Well, maybe some of them had observed them with Jesus. That's a possibility. There's another possibility that that's the only way they could explain what these guys were doing and saying. At any rate, question here for application. Is there anybody in my life who is astonished and takes note that I have been with Jesus? When I was in high school, the Methodist church in our town in Stillwater was a pretty thriving youth group. And they had a sign outside the part of their building where they did most of their youth activities. And my memory is it was actually a cross, and on one of the cross beams they hung a sign. And it had, they would change it every once in a while, but it always had something thought-provoking on it. I recall one that said, if you were arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? It's an old saying and an old question, but it's worthy. Does my life demonstrate the fact that I've been with Jesus? Would there be enough evidence to convict me? I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty. All I'm doing is, my desire is that we would confront ourselves with how obvious is Jesus in our lives. You don't have to be a street preacher. You don't have to carry a 40-pound family Bible everywhere you go. You don't have to quote scriptures to everyone you encounter, but somehow people ought to be able to notice that we've been with Jesus. Well, Jesus said it this way: they will know you are mine by your love. And that was from the 70s. And they'll know we are Christians by our love. By our love. Hadn't changed. It just hasn't changed. Well, we'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.